Firstly, can you outline the main changes that have been announced and why is the UK doing this?
So in fact, what the UK has announced is a practice that is the common practice for most countries around the world, which is that if you are a citizen of a country, the most clear guarantee of your right of entry is to prove that you're a citizen of that country. And to do that is to enter on a passport of that country. So in Australia, for instance, any Australian citizen who wants to come into Australia to prove at the airport, or in fact even before the airport, to get onto an airplane now, the airlines want proof that you have a right to travel to that place. So in Australia, you need to show your Australian passport, or if you're not an Australian, to show a visa. Well, in the UK in the past, they had a slightly broader approach, which is that if you had a right of residence, you could enter in as a British citizen on another country's citizenship, if you're a dual citizen, if you could show also your right of residence. So what they're doing is they're changing that expectation to prove your right of residence with the most fundamental reference point for that, which is a British passport. So an Australian citizen who's also a British citizen would need to leave Australia on their British passport in order to show the airline that they have a right of entry into the UK. And then when they come back into Australia, they have to show their Australian passport. So the change really for dual Australian and British citizens is that they need both of their passports. And as I said at the beginning, that's really a norm that is being reverted to rather than the situation that was before.
OK, but Irish passport holders are also affected by changes, aren't they? How come that's the case when Ireland, at least Southern Ireland, is a separate country to the UK?
It is indeed, but in the same vein of the UK having had different rules for different, perhaps Commonwealth countries and people who had rights of residence, they're still maintaining that Irish citizens have that right of entry on their Irish passports. But if you're an Australian and Irish citizen, again, to prove that you have that right of entry, you would need to use your Irish passport to enter the UK. So in some ways, for dual Australian citizens, if you're a dual British citizen or a dual Irish Australian citizen, you need that other passport to enter into the UK now as proof of your right of entry into the UK.
Right, so let's get into some specific questions that have been sent in to us by viewers then, Kim.
Sure.
If people don't have enough time to comply with the changes before they're due to travel, they run out of time, in other words, what can they do?
So, well, there are two things. One is to find out immediately if you can get an expedited passport. So that's the most straightforward. And I know for people coming to Australia who are Australian citizens but haven't necessarily lived in Australia because of their dual citizenship, that's something that they've done in the past. So to expedite, to ensure that you do your best to try and get a UK passport, your British passport is the first step. Otherwise, then the UK Parliamentary Office have a website that I'd encourage UK citizens to have a look at, which give different avenues of trying to get proof of residence as your alternative to your actual passport. They do make a statement on their website that that proof of residence is more expensive than it is to get a passport, but that might be something that has more speed and efficiency if you are literally about to get onto a plane and need proof. Because one of the issues, as many travellers around the world who have the privilege of travel know, that now airlines are being much more conscious that they ensure that before you get onto their flight that you actually have a right of entry. Otherwise, they are going to be fined for taking someone who's not allowed in. So it's also just for peace of mind at the Australian airport heading out that you'll be let onto the plane. So there are avenues, and I really encourage people to go onto the UK Parliament's website with information about these changes to really drill down if you are in a situation where you're an Australian citizen who've relied on your Australian passport in the past to get into the UK, to follow up ASAP if you're planning to travel to the UK to see what the new requirements are. But if you can get your passport, that's the best and most straightforward way of proceeding.
Another question that's been sent in, Kim, does this capture children as well? Kids who've been born in Australia but who may be UK citizens by descent. What will be the impact on children, the next generation?
So this is where citizenship law is so complicated, because it depends on the different rules to do with citizenship by descent. And in fact, the many dual citizens in Parliament who were disqualified and had to resign from Parliament know too well that sometimes citizenship by descent is bestowed on people, but in other times you actually have to apply. And there are different rules if the parent themselves is a citizen by descent. So again, it's really important for the parent to determine by contacting British citizenship authorities whether their child is recognised as a citizen or whether they need to make an application. If they need to make an application, then that child could travel on an Australian passport if they're an Australian citizen, but again, they have to show a proof of right of residency, which could go with the fact that the parent is a citizen. But again, these are complicated issues, and I can understand why people are a little concerned. The most straightforward way is to ensure that you've applied for that child by descent to be recognised as a British citizen, and as soon as that recognition, to make an application for a passport for the child as well.
Right, and just quickly remind us the best place to get accurate information and answers, Kim.
So the UK Parliament, I've got it up here in front of me, has a whole information page about these changes, and so I'd encourage people to Google it, to go on to the UK Parliament changes for British dual citizens on re-entry into the UK, and to follow those links for the specific answers to their specific questions. But as a reminder that the privilege of dual citizenship is that you have a right of entry, but proof of entry, the most straightforward way is with your passport.